Hello everybody, this next pattern is called the Mallard and Claret. It's an old Scottish fly from the 1840s, I think. First tied by a guy named William Murdoch. I'll explain the materials as I go, put the recipe in the description. First off, I've got size 12 standard wet fly hook. Well, not standard, it is a 1X long, 1X strong, but it's fairly standard for a lot of wet flies. So I'm using some 8/0 black, or it's UTC 70 denier, which equates to about 8/0. So take your base back to about where the barb would be if you've got a barbed hook. And the tail of this thing is just golden pheasant tippets. These right here. So I'm going to take about 4 or 5 of these. So you can see this. This one's not the best shape, so I'm going to pull off those bottom 2 first, then get the next 4 or so. Okay. Now you want the tail about a body length. Hopefully you can get that second black bar showing. I like that. I think it looks just a little bit better. So get that right there. Take a look, make sure you're on top where you want it before you put a couple of locking wraps on it. Let's see, that top one's sticking up a little bit, but I'm going to leave that. I kind of like it. So next piece of material is just I got medium oval gold tinsel. I'm going to tie that in on this side here, but leave a bit of it long, just for to help beef up the base. Have a pretty bulky body with some claret colored seal fur here in just a second, but that's fine to leave that much of the ribbing on there. So bring your thread back to almost where you're starting your tail. Now this seal fur, this is a little bit tricky stuff. It takes a fair amount of it. It's not the easiest thing to work with. It's probably about the hardest part of this fly. So I'll put a little wax on here and put a good size clump of this stuff on here. You'll see in a second what I'm talking about, how this can be a little bit challenging to get a good noodle on here. So just do what you can. You don't have to worry about getting it all on here, because you're going to be twisting this stuff about every other turn anyway. So good first couple of turns, and it's going to be buggy at first. We probably end up having to trim some of these too, but so pull it back down and another spin there. Keep spinning it as you go. Might be every turn, might be every 2 turns on the hook. A little bit of taper looks good, but it's not really, the original patterns don't necessarily call for it. Now you want to take your body pretty much maybe 1 eye length back. So you can see it's coming off my thread just a little bit here. Get a couple there, and then just, that one's going to be a little bit of a mess, but I'll show you what we're going to do with that. So we're just going to get our head in. We're going to trim this in a second too. So trim this big clump right here. The ribs is really going to help hold this seal fur in. I'm going to do some counter wraps with the rib. Might still need to do a little bit of trimming with this real buggy body here. So I'm pulling this pretty tight to really lock this seal fur in. maybe 4 or 5 wraps on this size 12. Take a look. Am I evenly spaced enough? I think close enough. Don't worry about that front one being spaced. It's going to be covered with a hackle and a wing in just a second. So a couple of tight turns here. Get this locked in. Go ahead and trim your tinsel off. Now is when you'll want to trim some of this buggy seal fur right here. Might have a little bit right there. And I definitely have a mess up here at the head. That is going to be ugly if I don't start taking care of some of that right now. Don't trim it too neat. Part of the allure of the fly is the bugginess of the body. And that's just how seal fur is. That's just a characteristic of it. Looks good in the water, looks buggy too, but it's, you know, it's a little bit of a mess. I'm going to just try to get some of these away from that eye. Okay, that's enough right there. Okay, next component is just some brown soft hackle from a hen right here. Pull off this schlappen here on the bottom, this fluffy stuff. Now you don't want it to come necessarily to the, measure your length right there. You don't want it all the way to the point of the hook. I'm just going to bend these back, tie it into the by the front. Probably only going to get 2 wraps. That will be plenty enough. 2 wraps of this hackle. So get that in there. A couple of locking turns behind it. And then you can probably break this off if you're pulling your thread tight enough. And I just pulled the whole thing off. So should have probably cut it with the scissors. So let's see if we can salvage this. That happens. I'm going to have to go a little bit higher now to get that locked in there. Okay, I think that's locked in there pretty good. Now, might need your hackle pliers. I've got a couple inches of this stem, so I don't necessarily need my hackle pliers to wrap this one. Just try to preen these back. That's 1 full wrap right there. And here's my second full wrap. I'm going to lock that in right there. Couple of tight wraps right there, then 1 more in front of it. Now this one I'll just go ahead and snip this off. Pretty buggy looking right now, but when we preen it back and push this hackle down toward the bottom, we'll get the look we want. So see if I can get all these fibers in there. 1 more to go. I think that's about what I want. So let's get this some medium tight wraps up here. And there we go. There's the hackle. Want most of it on the bottom, more like a throat. So preen some of these out. Take a look at it. You might need to trim some on the top or pull some out if you have too many up here. That's where the wing's going to go. I'll just pull a couple of them out. And make sure you got a decent base here for the wing. That's the mallard part of the fly. So just mallard flank feathers, either gold or bronze, right here for the top. Get a pretty good bunch of them, because you will fold it over, as well as they'll bunch up. They're pretty thin fibers. So I've just plucked kind of 2 little bunches out of that feather right there. Now get them folded down and how you want to go. Now I've seen them tied with it way up high like this. I like mine a little bit lower, about just maybe a little bit shorter than the length of the tail. So hang your thread from where you want it to tie in. That's where I want it to tie in. So measure a length and then just a little pinch wrap directly on top. Come back toward me, check your length. Okay, I like that. Might be just a little long. Let's shorten that up just a hair. Let me see there. Okay, I'm gonna go with it about right there. Two turns. Are we? Take a look at it. Is that where I want it? Yep, that's just about right where I want it. So a couple of locking turns up here. It's about 4 turns total on the wing. Just pull this up. Snip it as close as you can here. And we'll bury that part in the head. These are pretty soft fibers. It's not that hard to bury them. Go back up to your eye and build the little ramp. You're gonna have a step right there if you don't pay attention to it. So it is a wet fly. Don't be afraid to have a decent sized head on it. Now if you're give it a little counterclockwise spin if you're using this UTC thread to flatten it out a little bit before you do your whip finish. 4 or 5 turn whip finish and then some head cement will be about all we need for this thing. Yeah, I got a little bit of my thread coming off down there. Let's see if I can get that before I put the head cement on it. Do the fish care? Not at all. Not at all. So, let's put a little drop of head cement on it. I'm going to use some UV resin here. One little drop. You might want to put it on your bodkin to make sure you don't put too much, but I usually just do it like that. Then use my bodkin to wrap this around, make sure I coat all the thread wraps. And there you have it. Classic mallard and claret. Really old wet fly. Does pretty well here on the East Coast. I'm sure it does well in most trout streams in the country. But not a difficult fly to tie. Pretty easy. You can knock out a dozen of these in an hour, and yeah, it's a pretty good looking, pretty effective wet fly. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.